Hello. In the study of the connected crisis from global element in 2021, there's a conclusion that we are living in the world of crisis. So crisis is no longer seen as a moment in time. It, is part of life. It's there. It can come anytime. It might be from your left. It might be from your right. That's why it's very, very important for all of us to equip at least a very basic knowledge on how to identify the crisis, how to deal, how to prepare, and how to manage the crisis itself. In the limitation of time that I'm having only 18 minutes today, my ambition is not to give you everything about managing crisis, which might be I'm not at that level. But what I aim to do is just to give you a very foundational thinking to prepare for you some very, very critical step, knowledge, and mentality to classify, to prepare, and to manage from issues, incident, to the crisis itself. There's many kinds of crises, from the personal level to the corporation level, to the government level. So it could be, identity crisis, existential crisis, if we talk about the personal crisis, to the corporation level, like quality crisis, like cyber attack, like data breach, fake news, things like that. Those can be, come in from the issue itself, escalate into the crisis and become threatening and become deadly anytime. Before we get into something very technical, I just want to lay down some key principles that I would like you to remember when you are facing or you are dealing with the crisis itself. Number one, crisis can happen to anyone, any government, any company, any business, regardless how good you are or regardless how bad you are. The crisis happened to you not just because you're bad. A lot of good people facing crisis because it's unexpected event. It turned from the small issue into the crisis anytime. The number two, best case scenario doesn't mean happy scenario, because in time of crisis there's no perfect or happy scenario. Best case scenario is mean the less damaged scenario. Worst case scenario doesn't mean the end of the world. So keep that in mind, that when you're dealing with the crisis, best case is not a happy case. Worst case is not the end of things. So there's always understand the situation, understand the development, understand the escalation is very, very important, and solve the issue with the understanding manner is very, very key. So having said that, let me go into the technique number one, which is, classify or identify the level of the challenge. When I say challenge, it means that, it could be issue, level number two, the level one is issue, the level number two is emergency or incident, and the level three is the crisis. How you differentiate the three levels. The issues, there's a lot of time, it's an ongoing debate. When I said it's an ongoing debate, it could be just opinion. It's not embedded from the truth. And then if it's not fact, if it's not truth, then the chance for it to escalate into the real incident or the real issue is, thin. It doesn't mean that you don't need to pay attention to it, because, if it's a debate, if it's an opinion, it can make noise. And then when it can make noise, it can be issues. It can be damaging if you're not doing anything, if you're not correcting the noise, if you're not coming out there, set your record straight, tell your story, then the issues is going to be forever there. And then, sometimes those issues coupled with some real truth, it become incident and become crisis eventually. The number two level is we normally call incident or emergency. It means that, those issues somehow has truth in it. People debate, people talking about the different story, but there's some certain truth in it. If it has a certain truth in it, the chance for it to escalate into the crisis is there. So pay attention, don't leave it unattended, manage it correctly so that it just contained at the level of emergency, and then you can solve that sort of level smoothly and thoroughly. Thing become crisis when you look at the 3 dimensions. You look at the health, you look at the safety, and you look at the financial aspect of things. And those one of 3 things, or even a lot of time it's 3 things at the same time, is getting into the level of damaging. That when you are in the level of crisis. So defining the level of crisis is help you have the right mentality, put the right resources, and strategize the right response plan. When you understand what sort of the level of threatening, of seriousness, of challenging you in, then the second step you need to do is to start thinking of solving the crisis. There's a 4 key steps in solving the crisis. Number 1 is learning. Number 2 is preparing. Number 3 is activating. Number 4 is resolving. Both steps are, without saying, very, very critical for solving crisis. In terms of learning, as I mentioned from the very earlier of my speech, that you need to understand the situation, you need to learn what's going on out there, you need to have the knowledge of the escalation better than anybody. By activating your monitoring system, the listening system, scraping all the information and doing the very timely analysis so that you can have, and then you basically, gather the right information out there. Those are learning steps. The second is the preparation. When it comes to preparation, there's key things that you need to remember. The number 1 is your key stakeholders. Key stakeholders who's the most important and who's matter the most and why. You need to understand the reason why they matter the most, because you need to understand the insight, the relationship between them and the issues that you're having, so that you can strategize the response. The second would be the scenario mapping. Scenario mapping requires a lot of strategy thinking and knowledge, and also you sitting on a bunch of information that ongoing and non-stop developing out there. You start map it into the predicted scenario. Imagine that with the news escalate the way it is at the moment, and then couple with the learning and the knowledge that you have in the past, how you start putting the scenario in place. And then when you put the scenario in place, think first of the area of risk. The different area of risk might lead you to the different scenario. And each scenario might lead you into the step of the escalation. The same risk, the same issues, but it might escalate into the different level. And then with that, you have the mapping of the scenario with you thoroughly. And then when you have the map of the scenario with you, you start thinking of that map against the key stakeholder, and then you start preparing the response plan. The response plan mean the communication, the messaging, the way that you deal with key stakeholder, and how you're going to do it, the way that you solve the problem. After all, learn, prepare, activate. Activate, there's 2 things in the activate: proactive and reactive. You need to do it timely and you need to do it strategically. There's a lot planned that you just prepare, but you don't proactively launch it, but you wait for things to escalate and you react. But there's a lot of things that you prepare, but you proactively going out there, share, launch, because you want yourself to be the first one who actually say it, correct it, put things in the right perspective. So this is proactive and this is reactive. There's a certain time that the plan that it should be, classify as the reactive and never do as a proactive, because there's a lot of information that you don't volunteer unnecessarily. Because when you do it, you might make the situation escalate into the worst direction. Last thing, after you do the learning, you do the preparation, you do the activation, and you need to do the resolving. The resolving always, at the end of each crisis, you feel like that you're doing a certain good thing, you feel like some certain thing that you could do a little better, do the learning and do the both recoveries. Keep in mind that, regardless how good or how bad you are, crisis can happen. But the way that you handle crisis, the way that you manage and you walk out of crisis is going to tell people, it's going to tell public, it's going to tell every key stakeholder how good you are as a person, how good you are as a corporation, how good you are, and how human you are as a business. And then, crisis will be there, damage will be there. But the post crisis is going to help you strengthen the reputation because the way you manage the crisis. Remember that. So some key thing that I just want to highlight when it comes into the mapping the scenario. Always think of, mapping the scenario is mean that you think the area of risk, and then from the area of risk, you start, having the scenario around those risks. Think of the best case scenario and think of the worst case scenario. As I mentioned, the best case scenario is the less damage scenarios, and the worst case scenario is maybe the most damage, but it doesn't mean that the world is end. When it comes into mapping the key stakeholder, think of the people who matter most and why. Because when you think of why, you think of the insight. When you think of the insight, you think of the plan. The plan based on the right insight is mean that it's going to be the good plan to deal with the crisis and deal with those key stakeholders. So those are the techniques that you are doing the classification of the issues, emergency in the crisis. After you define the level of the challenge, you come into the, handling the crisis. In handling the crisis, 4 steps: learning, preparing, activation, and resolving. The last thing that I would like to share when it comes into technique is how to prepare your response plan, or, in the crisis training document, we normally call key messaging. When it comes into the key messaging, the technique that we call CAP, C-A-P, super important. C stands for concern. A lot of people that when I'm talking to or when I'm doing the crisis training, they anxious when they come into the response plan. They want to tell people out there that, they're not doing anything wrong. They correct because they this and this. Hang on a minute. The very first thing that you need to put in your messaging is to share your concern and show your care to the people who actually affected during the crisis. It's not immediately talking about you. This is a chance for you to show that how understanding, how compassionate, how caring you are to the people who those got affected during crisis. That's C, concern. A stand for action. This is the time that you start telling people that what you're gonna do to fix the problem. Share the plan. If you don't have a full plan, share step by step, and keep the communication ongoing so that you can go out there telling people that you are solving it, and this is the next step, this is the next step. And the last thing, that way you're gonna put the B. It means the perspective. That when you're gonna come and you're gonna tell people that this is how the issue should be understood. This is a chance for you to come in underlining that, you are not doing anything wrong if you want to. With that, I would like to wrap up my speaking. Thank you so much for listening. But before we just saying goodbye, there's one quote from Amit Reyes that I want to use to wrap up my presentation. That in time of crisis, doubt or confusion, take the higher road. The road of compassion, kindness, courage, understanding. At the end of the day, don't forget that we are human. What does it mean? It means human makes mistake. and human cannot control everything. So don't try to control everything, and remember, when you do the right thing, at the end, everything will be fine. Thank you.